Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Before we begin, I should say that any halfway decent person is going to find certain details of today's crime report to be disturbing, but in pursuit of the truth, we have to uncover some pretty ugly stuff. East Hempfield Township, Pennsylvania, Friday, December 1st, 2023. The East Hempfield Township Police Department was contacted by the Manor Township Police Department. Manor Township PD told the East Hempfield PD that a witness in a separate investigation had reported the abuse of a juvenile victim in East Hempfield. Further interviews had revealed that the alleged abuse had taken place at a home on Sites Drive from 2011 all the way through 2013, when the victim was 4 years old, up until the victim was the age of 6. The suspects in this case were a man and a woman. The man was identified as 56-year-old John DeHart, and the woman identified as 34-year-old Sarah Miller. The police conducted an investigation, but since there were no black people being accused of anything, the wheels of justice moved at a snail's pace. So it took over 4.5 months before the authorities in Pennsylvania tore themselves away from the Dunkin' Donuts to try to make an arrest in this child pedophilia case. On April 18th, the police finally got around to arresting John DeHart in Philadelphia and had him extradited back to Lancaster County. So he got 80 miles away from the scene of the crime before he was finally nabbed. But DeHart wasn't the only one who tried to flee. Sarah Miller was also on the run too, and as of this morning's briefing, she still hasn't been caught yet. Keep in mind, this was 3 weeks ago. How did she escape? Well, the police did give her all the time in the world to realize they were closing in on her. It's a miracle that both of them hadn't sold the house and skipped the country like Ethan Couch did. Police interviewed the victim in this case, and as it turned out, John DeHart is the victim's father, and Sarah Miller, the victim's mother. She was being victimized by her own parents. In an interview with police, the victim described an incident where she had walked into DeHart and Miller's bedroom and was subsequently made to undress and then get in bed with them. The victim was then forced to perform sexual acts, they said. The victim told police that on multiple occasions, DeHart would sexually assault the victim, saying that if the child didn't comply, they would be a bad kid and end up in the basement. And apparently DeHart made good on this threat because the victim said they were made to sit naked in the basement with the lights off for hours on end. In one instance, DeHart reportedly pointed a small gun at the victim and said, "This is a warning." According to the charging documents, the victim told police that there were at least 2 other victims also living in the home at the time of the abuse. The second victim also spoke to the police and said that DeHart once picked them up and took them to the oven, as if he was going to put the victim inside. A third victim told police that DeHart allegedly said something along the lines of, "Who wants to be my dinner?" The second victim also told police that DeHart would occasionally take the first victim away from the others, and when the victim returned, they would be crying. DeHart has since been charged with rape of a child, statutory sexual assault, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, incest, indecent assault, corruption of minors, endangering the welfare of children, and terroristic threats. Now, in a case like this guy should have been thrown under the jail in the deepest, darkest hole they got with absolutely no bail whatsoever. But, of course, you can probably guess what he actually got. He's in Lancaster County Prison on a $1 million bail. Sarah Miller has also been charged with rape of a child, statutory sexual assault, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, incest, indecent assault, corruption of minors, and endangering the welfare of children. But, as of this morning's briefing, Sarah Miller still remains on the loose, and the Lancaster DA's office said that she may go by the first name Sarah, without the H, and be using the last name Suitor. Hell, as much of a lead time as they gave her, she could have changed her name and her face by now. This is so disgusting on so many levels. You see why I gave the advisory at the beginning of this briefing. Here we are 13 years after this animalistic torture of children began and 11 years after it allegedly ended, and it's only just now that something is being done, however raggedly that effort is. Time and again we keep seeing the police give these suspects all the time in the world to make a run for it, and all too often that's exactly what they do. How did these creeps know that the police were closing in on them? I wouldn't at all be surprised if they got friends in law enforcement. A lot of these degenerates usually do. But why did it take so long for someone to finally say something about this house of horrors? I find it very difficult to believe that the neighbors all were in the dark about this, that you have multiple victims being abused and violated in this torture chamber, and apparently none of the neighbors knew about it, or at least nobody said anything until a decade after all this mess had been going on. But do you want to hear another disgusting aspect of this entire putrid episode? There's been other cases in Lancaster County that are actually worse than this one. You had another man out there in Lancaster County named Vladimir Sayevsky, and he's being accused of sexually violating 5 minors. Yeah, 5 of them. And the accusations against him span from 2006 to 2021. Each of the female victims has already given reports against Sayevsky, and he's not the only one either. You also had another incident where a 64-year-old rapist was found guilty on 30 charges, including the rape of 3 minors. This guy had been violating minors from 1995 to 2002, and then again from 2014 until 2021. And these were just the cases that were high profile enough that they couldn't be completely buried by the white media. The point is that what's happened with this Miller and DeHart character, it's only the tip of a very large, very ugly iceberg. One that the white media is determined to make sure you don't see the totality of. Well, this just goes to show what's been happening outside of the large urban centers. Oh yeah, you got those people who are so concerned about getting out of the big city. I don't want to be anywhere near Philadelphia. Yeah, well, this is what's going on in Lancaster County. This is what's been going on in these hamlets and these suburbs and all of these places out there in the middle of nowhere. This is the kind of stuff that occurs but doesn't get widely reported on. I guess they were looking for another kind of person whose face they can put up there. If you're trying to do the crime blotter at the beginning of every news broadcast, well, there's some faces that they prefer to show over others. And this is just 2 of the cases that's come out of Lancaster County just in the last month alone. This is what's been going on just in the last month alone. You got these 3 monsters who happen to finally come to light, and someone's trying to do something about them, but look how long they were allowed to just sit there and engage in this behavior and get away with it. One thing that Brother Tariq frequently points out is that we don't have a culture of open pedophilia. We don't allow it. If somebody does harm a child and then tries to run, their own family will turn them in. And here we have these 2 reprobates using their home as a torture dungeon for children for years and years, and some person in the next town over has to speak up on it. Apparently the neighbors had no idea what was going on. The Chris Rufos and other assorted trash constantly tell us about how history needs to be banned in schools because it will allegedly hurt white children's feelings. Meanwhile, you have incidents where you have more than feelings being hurt, and Rufo and his racist pals are nowhere to be seen. Neither are the Ron DeSantises of this world. You see, these white supremacists, they don't care about the well-being of white children at all, and that's the problem. These racists on the white right hate black people more than they love white children. And this allows degenerates like these 2 to operate freely because everyone's being distracted with lies about children being taught to hate white people when the hateful behavior is happening in these homes. White supremacy harms everything it touches, even those who it claims to benefit. There's no end to the lies white supremacy will tell in order to get the heat off of itself. It's a suicide pact. And those who promote, defend, and spread it are as responsible for creating and perpetuating the social environment as these perpetrators like this Miller character and DeHart. It makes no sense at all. Over a decade's passed since these alleged events happened, multiple victims, and for some doggone reason we don't have the wrath of God descending on these 2 is being treated as just another investigation. That's the reason why this mess happens. These perpetrators know that they're being given basically immunity from law, to a point at least, and as long as they don't get too out of hand, they'll be allowed to continue in perpetuity, because that's how these things actually work in practice. I don't believe that any of these reprobates are suspended in midair. I think that the authorities know more than they're letting on. Hell, if we dig deeply enough, we'll probably find that the reason that it took so long for the cops to go after them is because there may well have been a few people in law enforcement who might have been involved. This stuff happens constantly. Whenever you see the billboards or the TV spots talking about human trafficking in the United States, this is what they're talking about. But the white media also continues to play its own game of trying to color code who's going to be the face of sexual predation in America. So if you're black, they can go ahead and plaster you all over the place. But if you're not, well, we need to handle this a little bit more discreetly. This is how the white media, along with these callous so-called government officials, create a permissive social environment for this kind of behavior. I've told you numerous times in the past about Drew Clinton. This is a teenager who basically walked in the footsteps of Brock Turner. He raped a young woman, and then the judge on the case said that he wasn't going to give Drew Clinton any prison time because he didn't want to ruin the rapist's life. So instead he said, well, the kid's been in jail for 5 months now, so because of that, that's enough. That's enough time. We'll just go ahead and let him go. He's suffered enough. He did this in open court. Now what happened was, after this scandal broke, he got reelected to office. So even though the people out there in his area knew what he had done, they looked and said, hey, he's letting rapists go free, that's fine. That's because as far as they're concerned, they understand that if you start enforcing the law equally across the board, well, that's going to seriously hamper the freedom of movement and freedom of activity of certain people. And that being the case, well, genetic immunity from law simply must be maintained. Now, that crooked judge, by the way, he wound up being removed by state governmental officials, but not by the people who actually live out there, the people who actually have to live with the crooked rulings that this guy hands down. That happens to be what I mean by a socially permissive environment, and the bad guys know this. They're well aware that where certain criminality is concerned, the white media gladly looks the other way, and the authorities decide that they're not going to do anything about it. Why is it that we have a never-ending string of students who are being abused and even violated by these teachers in school? Well, as far as the white media is concerned, unless there's a sufficient number of black teachers who they can put on the hook, they're looking and going, well, we don't want to give too much attention to that. It would set the wrong precedent. This is exactly what happened with Me Too. When you had too many of these white male executives who were getting accused, oh, it's time to change the headlines. Truth be told, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we looked up a year or 2 or 3 from now and found that Sarah Miller had already gone underground and resurfaced somewhere, working as a teacher under an assumed name. And that's what goes on. That's why this continues to happen. It's a shame, but it's also largely preventable too. These things are happening because of the way the society has chosen to conduct its affairs. You can't have societal license and legal immunity bestowed on people and think that they're not going to take advantage of it. That simply flies in the face of common sense. But then again, we don't live in a world that's run by common sense. We live in one where the powers that be run it according to the principles of white supremacy. And until that changes, nothing else will. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Frederica Moore, Gregory Franklin, Suleiman Alaji, Sam Ham, and Donna Cooks. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.